It began not with a war, not with a gunshot, but with a quiet shift of power and a young nation's appetite for land. In the early 1800s, Mexico was one of the largest nations in the Western Hemisphere, richer in territory than the United States itself. After gaining independence from Spain in 1821, Mexico inherited a vast empire that stretched from modern-day California to Central America. But beneath that surface of grandeur lay cracks, political chaos, regional rebellions, and a fragile sense of national identity. Meanwhile, north of the Rio Grande, a much younger United States had a different kind of energy, ambitious, expansionist, and ruthless in its vision of manifest destiny. It wasn't just a phrase. It was a doctrine, a belief that America was destined to expand westward, across the continent, no matter the cost. But why did Mexico, so vast and promising, begin to collapse under its own weight? The answer lies in a perfect storm of missteps, betrayals, and an adversary who never blinked. The first blow came from within. Mexico's early independence brought celebration but little stability. In just a few decades, the country had over 40 different presidents, shifting between monarchy, federalism, and dictatorship. Meanwhile, native tribes like the Apache and Comanche fiercely resisted both Mexican and American settlers in the northern frontier, forcing Mexico to defend thousands of miles with too few soldiers and almost no money. Then came Texas. In 1821, Mexico welcomed American settlers into Texas to populate the empty lands. It was a gamble, offering land grants in exchange for loyalty. But the settlers brought with them a different culture, a different language, and most critically, slaves, despite Mexico outlawing slavery. By 1836, Texas declared its independence from Mexico, leading to the now famous Battle of the Alamo and the victory of Texian rebels under Sam Houston. Mexico, under President Santa Anna, was humiliated. But even worse, the United States recognized the new Republic of Texas and 10 years later annexed it. Mexico saw this as an act of aggression, but America had bigger plans. President James K. Polk wanted not just Texas, he wanted California, New Mexico, the entire Southwest, and so the fuse to the Mexican-American War was lit. In 1846, after a border skirmish near the Rio Grande, President Polk asked Congress to declare war. Mexico was already weakened, internally divided, and unprepared for a full-scale invasion. U.S. forces, led by generals like Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott, launched coordinated attacks by land and sea. Within months, U.S. troops had seized key territories. By 1847, they marched into Mexico City and raised the American flag over the National Palace. The war ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. The terms? Devastating. Mexico ceded half of its territory, including California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming, in exchange for just $15 million. It was one of the largest land transfers in modern history. But Mexico had little choice. The alternative was total destruction. Yet this wasn't the end. Just 5 years later, in 1853, the U.S. purchased another slice of land, the Gadsden Purchase, for railroad development, taking parts of southern Arizona and New Mexico. From the outside, it looked like Mexico was simply weak. But that wasn't the full story. Mexico didn't lose because it lacked bravery. It lost because it was betrayed by history, outmaneuvered by ambition, and trapped in a power game it didn't start. But what happened after the land was gone? How did this loss shape the soul of a nation? And how did the United States justify such aggressive expansion? Mexico, a vast and powerful nation in the early 1800s, stood at a crossroads of history. It had gained independence from Spain in 1821, inheriting a rich, expansive territory that stretched from what is now California to Central America. But even as it celebrated newfound freedom, it struggled to define its identity. Its position in the world seemed assured, but beneath the surface, things were crumbling. The newly formed Mexican government, led by an unstable mix of rulers, was caught in a whirlwind of political chaos. The country was divided, its leaders constantly shifting between monarchies, republics, and military rule. In contrast, the United States to the north was beginning to carve out its own path to dominance, an expansionist vision that would soon reach far beyond its borders. The rise of the United States. As the 19th century unfolded, the U.S. grew stronger and more determined. Its leaders were guided by the concept of manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to stretch across the entire North American continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The U.S. was not content with its current boundaries. It looked longingly at the territories held by Mexico. At the same time, Mexico's national identity was fragile. The new nation had to contend with multiple challenges. The vast northern territories were sparsely populated and difficult to govern. The U.S., with its growing population and power, began to take notice of these unprotected lands. The Texas crisis, the first domino in the downfall of Mexican territory, was Texas. In 1821, Mexico allowed American settlers to move into its northernmost territory of Texas, hoping to boost its population and control. However, these settlers, many from the southern U.S., brought their own customs, culture, and, most significantly, their slaves. Mexico had abolished slavery, but American settlers continued to hold enslaved people. This cultural divide and the settlers' growing discontent led to the Texas Revolution in 1835. The rebellious Texans, aided by American volunteers, fought and eventually declared their independence from Mexico. The battle culminated in the infamous Battle of the Alamo, where a group of Texian rebels made a final stand against Mexican forces under General Santa Anna. Despite the defeat at the Alamo, Texas won its independence in 1836 and declared itself the Republic of Texas. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, making it part of the Union. This move infuriated Mexico, which had never recognized the independence of Texas. The Mexican-American War. The annexation of Texas by the United States set the stage for the Mexican-American War. Tensions between the two nations reached a breaking point when disputes arose over the southern border of Texas. The U.S. claimed the Rio Grande as the boundary, while Mexico insisted the correct border was the Nueces River, further north. In 1846, President James K. Polk, eager to expand U.S. territory, provoked a conflict with Mexico. U.S. troops, led by General Zachary Taylor, entered the disputed territory. When Mexican forces attacked, Polk seized the opportunity to call for war, claiming that Mexico had shed American blood on American soil. Mexico was caught off guard. It had a larger territory, but its military was spread thin and underfunded. The country was not prepared for the onslaught that followed. The war was fought on multiple fronts, and U.S. forces quickly made inroads into Mexican land. The fall of Mexican territory. The war's rapid success for the United States shocked many. By 1847, American forces had taken several key cities, including Monterrey and Mexico City. Mexico was in no position to continue the fight, and on February 2, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, officially ending the war. Mexico was forced to give up half of its territory, including all of modern-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and parts of Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. In exchange, the United States paid Mexico $15 million, a paltry sum for the vast territory now controlled by the U.S. The Gadsden Purchase. Even after the war, the United States was not finished. In 1853, the U.S. made a final land deal with Mexico, the Gadsden Purchase, buying a strip of land in southern Arizona and New Mexico. This was a key area for building a southern railroad, and it further diminished Mexico's territorial holdings. Mexico's once proud empire, stretching from the U.S. border down to Central America, had been reduced to a fraction of its former size. The loss was not just physical, It was emotional, political, and psychological. Mexico had lost its place as the dominant power in North America, and the United States had solidified its control over the continent. Mexico's struggles after the loss. The territorial loss left Mexico severely weakened. It had to rebuild after the war, but it was left with a shattered economy, a fractured society, and a demoralized population. The loss of the northern territories meant that Mexico could no longer rely on its natural resources like gold and silver to fuel its economy. Internally, Mexico was dealing with social and political instability. The North, now part of the U.S., had been a region that required constant attention and resources. Without it, Mexico found it difficult to unite its diverse regions and maintain control. Why did Mexico lose so much? The question remains. Why did Mexico lose so much territory so quickly? The answer is a complex mix of internal instability, external pressure from a more powerful neighbor, and a series of miscalculations that left Mexico vulnerable to expansionist forces. Mexico's political chaos, combined with the United States' aggressive expansionism, made for a perfect storm. The internal disunity made it difficult for Mexico to defend its borders effectively, while the United States' rapid growth and unrelenting ambition led to the annexation of vast territories. Mexico was simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, facing a neighboring power that had the momentum and will to take what it wanted. The tragedy of this lost territory was not just in the land itself, but in the cultural and psychological scars it left on the Mexican people. The scars of that war and the treaty that followed are still visible today in Mexico's relationship with its northern neighbor, the United States.